Hey everyone, it's Jay Grant, and this is my Cyberpunk Kabuto documentary part 1. So, as some of you know, I decided I was going to take my N95 mask and spice it up some because it was boring. So I put on this Japanese samurai mask, attached it with some strong Velcro, it's impact resistant, and it gets a lot of, compliments every time I wear it outside. But I thought, it's cool. What if I could make a cyberpunk Kabuto? I first got the idea while I was watching a movie that Sturgill Simpson put out in 2018 called Sound and Fury. Now, if you haven't taken the time to watch this on Netflix, I highly recommend it. Sturgill Simpson, best known for bluegrass and country western, put out what can only be called the most awesome cyberpunk weird, artistic movie with an amazing, amazing soundtrack that I've seen in years. It's got everything. It's got crazy visuals. It's got violence. It's got revenge. It's got very strange, eye-popping scenery. And you should really just go ahead and watch it. And the character, one of the main characters in the Sound and Fury, is a gal who's wearing this Kabuto, cyberpunkish Kabuto with, this need to avenge her dad, and it's just an amazing movie. Cannot recommend it enough. And I figured, hey, what if I could make a fully functional Kabuto? Well, what is a Kabuto? It's a samurai helmet, and they have a long and varied history when it comes to the Kabuto itself. And I started looking at historical ones and the construction of them. And the early ones were a little simple. The later you get in the samurai era, the more fancy they get, the more ridiculous they get. I liked the use of horns on some of them, but for the most part, I wanted to keep this wicked looking, but also functional and not weighed down with a ton of dragons and horns and crazy stuff. Also, I've been thinking about attending Wasteland Weekend, or a Wasteland event. It's basically like a Ren Fair for people who want a post-apocalyptic experience. Most Wastelanders make their own gear, and it's very functional. And I figured it'd be really cool to go to my first Wasteland with sort of a post-apocalyptic cyberpunk samurai outfit. And I think it came out okay. So the first thing I had to do was learn a lot of the parts of a Kabuto. This was interesting. One of the first things I realized was the hachi, which is the basic bell of the helmet. Usually it's handmade, painstaking process where you cut and attach and weld a whole bunch of parts that it perfectly fits your head. And I realized I didn't need to do that. A lot of military helmets already resemble a hachi, just by itself. So I decided I was going to purchase a replica, but a functional one, of a German World War II helmet, because it really already looked a lot like a hachi in basic shape. And I went ahead and got it, and also picked up some primer in a rusty red, and that way I could mess it up and make it look a little more like an actual samurai helmet and not like, a Nazi helmet. So as you can see, the German soldier helmet, this is 1.8 millimeter steel, hardened, is what I was told. This one is brand new. It is a replica. It was never used by a soldier. It's got a leather liner, which is good because without the liner, the helmet's kind of useless. And I wanted to see what I could do to put the ornamentation on in a way that I could remove it. So I also got some very thin masking tape. I'd used this primer before in masking projects, and it's really good stuff. Also, I liked the antler look, so I decided for the centerpiece, I was going to add some antlers, these plastic ones. Now, I wanted as much of this to be as modular as possible, so that I could just put things on the helmet and attach the neck veins onto it as the only permanent part of it. So to make things easy to put on and remove from the helmet, I bought these 20-pound magnets, which stick to the hardened steel of the hachi and don't come off real easy. So that was actually really important to me. So now I was ready to paint it up. Of course, very first thing I needed to do was put some pinstriping on it, and the easiest way I could think of doing that would be to mask it, as I'm doing here. And I'm not new to masking projects whatsoever, as I already noted. My burn camp did some art projects back in the day where a lot of the art was masked. Here, I was just doing this by sight. I tried to do as little measuring as possible on this. I'm kind of a perfectionist when it comes to my art projects, and this time I didn't want to be a perfectionist. I wanted this to be functional, and to look good, but I also wanted it to have a little bit of play to it, a little bit of, dings and nicks, and if everything looked absolutely perfect, it'd be no good. Applying tape like this is always fun for me. Make sure it's at least mostly straight, but I'm just doing this by eyeball. Oh, here's some of my burn camps art that we did in the past using this masking effect. And there's also a DJ booth that we created that was probably one of my favorite masking projects, as seen here. So once I had the tape mostly in place, I decided I was going to leave the front brim of the Hachi black so I could paint it up later. Give it a little decoration by hand with some brass paint or copper paint. But I wanted to leave the brim blackish. Anywhere I'm putting tape is where I want it to stay black. All in all, I think I got it mostly centered. Now it's time to do some painting. I didn't want even coverage either. I wanted some of it to be darker, some of it to be redisher. And so you see me here hitting it in spots instead of continuous spray. Give it sort of a beaten up, more organic effect than if I just spray painted it flat. I also wanted the antlers to basically be the same color. So once again, these are plastic cake toppers of all the things, but I liked the look of them, and they were, I think, $8 on Amazon. So just hitting the antlers with some of that primer. And the helmet. So the next morning, once it was properly dried, it was one of my favorite parts of any masking effect. I love the peeling off the tape. It's a lot like when you peel the plastic off of a new piece of electronic equipment. Overall, I think the coverage came out pretty well on this. It was almost exactly the effect I was looking for, and I could always touch it up later. Although at this point it did occur to me that just by itself, the Hachi looked like a basketball. Still, had a long way to go from here. Now, I wanted a headlamp on this that would be functional for use out in the woods, so I also wanted it to be able to come on and off with the magnets. So I colored the magnets, snipped out some aluminum strips, and then painted them black. And these would replace the straps that would normally hold the headlamp to your head. I wanted it to hold the headlamp to the helmet. And to attach the magnets to the strap, I initially bought these spikes, which are qualified certificate. They're too short, turns out, so I'm just going to save these spikes for some other project, I guess. Instead, I used an older set of spikes that I had, and just to make sure that this magnet was really attached, I went ahead and dabbed some Gorilla Glue on there too. You're going to see a lot of Gorilla Glue in this project. But now you had a strap, and I of course secured it with duct tape as well, later to be painted. And then, had to do that on two sides. The antlers came out looking spectacular, as you can see. And because I didn't want the spikes to be bright, shiny silver, I decided to, protect the other parts of the headlamp with cardboard and then hit the spikes with some black primer. And then a light dusting of sort of a gold metallic, copper metallic spray paint. Doing this by hand. I didn't want the antlers to be shiny, but I wanted them to have a little bit of metallic glimmer to them. And that came out pretty damn well. Now it was time to make the veins of the back of the neck piece of the samurai helmet, which the first one would have to be 20.5 inches. The shikoro, or neck guard, on a samurai helmet is the part in the back and sides that really gives Kabuto the really traditional samurai helmet look. It's for protecting your neck and sides of your head. The original ones were made out of wood. I decided I was going to use cardboard as a form here. I wasn't entirely sure what I wanted to make the shikoro out of. Originally, I was thinking I would go down to a tire place and cut out strips of rubber tire and see what that looked like. And I would just cut these cardboard forms. Now, here I am giving it a little bit of excess because once the veins, once the blades of it are cut out of whatever material I went with, I wanted to be able to trim off the excess and make it look just a little more in line, I guess. But here I am measuring a little bit because I wanted to make sure each of the veins, each of the blades was about 3 inches wide. Do not know where I came up with that number. I just went with it. Having done some costuming before, I cannot stress enough how much cardboard I've had to cut in my life to use as a pattern for things. So that's the first vein done. I was like, yeah, that's a good size. All right. Cutting out the pattern. And then, trying it on for the fit. I only realized later I was doing this backwards. I should have measured it by putting the vein on the outside of the helmet, not on the inside of the brim. But in the end, because I left so much excess, it didn't really matter. So now it's time to cut the next veins. And here I am. Figured I would just trace the original one and then extend it by hand on the arc. So here I am doing so. Just figured, make it a little wider. And then just this one, I literally just did by hand, roughly another 3 inches. This is going to be the bottommost blade of the shikoro. Once I had them good and extended out, with plenty of excess, as I said, because you could always trim off the excess, but you can't extend it very easily if you don't make it long enough. Thanks to Amazon for shipping things in handy boxes that I can cut up. It should be noted everything in this project pretty much came from Amazon, including the helmet itself, the Hachi. $60. Arrived pretty fast, too. But now I had all 3 blades cut out. And I wanted to just mock it up real quick. Again, I'm doing this not quite correctly, but fortunately I figured that out before I started drilling holes. So far, looked good. Now, what would I make the shikoro, right. I realized I needed to first do the centerpiece, I forget the Japanese name for it, the centerpiece for the helmet. I wanted a skull with the antlers coming out of it, and I decided I was going to use Sculpey! It's a polymer clay that I've used many a time. You harden it in your oven, and it stinks like hell. I didn't know which way I wanted the antlers to point at first, and It was literally while I was taking this video, I realized it looked better this way with the prongs pointing upwards. So go ahead and stick that into the soft clay with the skull. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this is rad. Once I paint the Sculpey, it's going to be this like really golden black, nasty centerpiece. And then I realized while we were doing these videos, we were having our HVAC unit replaced, and they were throwing away a lot of parts made of thin sheet metal. And I was like, wait a minute, I can make the Shikoro out of that. That's going to be so much lighter and it'll look better than the tires. So that was when I was just like, hey, Fox, you got anything good for cutting this sheet of steel that we were about to throw out? Now, this stuff is not the same as the helmet. This is basic, cheap, like almost soft steel. I almost thought it was tin. But it's not tin, it's definitely steel. And once I had the lines marked right there, now it was time to cut. So here I am marking the end points. And that's when I pulled the Sculpey out of the oven and discovered that I cooked it at way too high and ruined the entire skull sculpture that I had worked for about half an hour to create. And there's nothing as terrible as finding out that you cooked your Sculpey at too high of a temperature. It just bubbled and expanded and baked, so I was gonna have to start over on that. Here's Fox. He wanted to help out on this, and because we didn't know exactly how soft this steel was, we decided to start with an angle grinder. That turned out to be overkill, and we realized it was also a little unwieldy, and we wanted this not to turn out completely rough, so we switched to a Dremel. And the Dremel went right through it like butter, but was painstaking and long, and it was doing about, death to about one grinding wheel per blade. So you can see us dremeling it. And then, because we're geniuses, we realized this steel was so soft we could just take some shears to it. So that's what we ended up doing for the rest of it after the first few cuts. A lot of this project was trial and error, and a lot of it was just ideas on the fly. I did not draw this out, I did not plan this, and here's what I was doing with the other Sculpey, the regular Sculpey that I normally use, which is just original Sculpey. I made another skull, and I figured since I had so much sheet metal, I could just make the centerpiece disc out of some of that metal. And here I am attaching the antlers, making holes before I bake it. The original Sculpey comes out in a very terracotta finish and is easily painted, which is what I was going to do. But all in all, not bad for the second skull. And now it was time to, while the Sculpey cooked, I was going to grind off the burrs of the edges of the blades for the neck piece. This is actually a little painstaking, and whoever made a Dremel spin counterclockwise is a jerk, because it's throwing sparks like up against my arm and my face. Always wear your eye probe, for the record. But it wasn't that hard, just use a sanding wheel. I wasn't trying to, completely perfectly blunt it out, but I wanted to get rid of the sharp points and the burrs and sharper edges, because I already knew I was going to wrap this thing in duct tape. Yay, sparks. I think you can see in this part a couple of the burrs on it, even with care while cutting with the shears. You ended up with these tiny little spikes that they rubbed up against your skin, you'd have a bad day. So, some pretty heavy-duty duct tape. I figured I would just black it out. This would blunt the edges even more, and would also give it sort of a striped finish, like it was made out of some kind of, weird material in the apocalypse. So, painstakingly attaching duct tape to one side of it. I figured on the other side, originally, I would duct tape one side smoothly, and on the back end where you can see the ends of the tape, I was going to actually glue some cloth there, just in case the neck blades ended up against my neck. I wanted something soft as padding. So that's one of the blades taped, and this is another of the blades being taped. Cardboard, duct tape, and scrap metal. Lots of fun. So, once I had all the blades, you know, taped up, looking good, it was time to start screwing around with the centerpiece, the ornamental centerpiece. As you can see, the Sculpey came out baked, nice and hard, and the holes that I'd made for the antlers were just the right size. Gorilla Glue is one of my absolute favorite adhesives when it comes to this kind of art project. It is basically super glue on steroids, and it also bubbles out a little, expands a little, gives a really, really solid seal. And I figured, you know, with the bubbling effect, it would give it more of a, you know, skull-growing antlers look, and then I was painted. Came out great. So for the centerpiece itself, you can put wood screws into Sculpey, and I put a couple of tap holes there with a toothpick. And I actually managed to do that without measuring at all. I got the screw placements just perfect by using my thumb as a ruler. Rule of thumb, as it were. So a little Gorilla Glue, a couple of wood screws, and that sucker is on there tight. Also a little bit more of that brass paint. And then I attached it to the helmet, and you can see this was not stable at all. Boing! Bouncy! Oh, no, that won't do. So I needed to stabilize it. But an interesting thing occurred to me. Found out that I had an old cell phone, a magnetic cell phone holder from my previous car, and with just a little bit of twisting of some wires with needle nose pliers on the spike, this actually stabilized it like rock solid, as you can see. Like, there is no bounce, and also the whole ornament and headlamp can come off, which is exactly what I want. The next day, it was now time to do some drilling, and I was really nervous about this part, because if I screwed this up, I was going to have to start over with a new helmet, and I did not like the idea of screwing this up. I did not have a drill press, so I got a titanium bit and decided, you know what? No guts, no glory, let's do this by hand. Also, I was a little worried at the time that I'd been sold just a cheap helmet made of soft pot steel, not the hardened steel helmet that I, you know, bought, I paid for. Yeah, that worry was, as you will see, completely unfounded. This is very, very hard steel, and I had to edit out literally an hour of drilling 5 holes. Each of the holes took about 6 minutes to bore through, and that was even with using a little bit of cutting lube. I am pressing my entire weight down as I drill these holes, and I am not a small dude. But low RPMs, titanium bit, a little bit of 3-in-1 oil, and a long, long, hard workout of shoving these holes through. When I very first started this, I was now worried that I wouldn't be able to get through, but as you can see, I did. And then just, you know, hit it with a real quick bzzzt from the other side, just to, you know, round out the hole. But that was the very first hole. Surprisingly, I measured it. It's not that the hole is off center, but the stripe that it's next to is off center. Not that it matters, you can't see it in the finished product. And I decided I was going to do a total of 5 of these holes. Oh boy. Lots and lots of holes, lots and lots of drilling. I drilled the first 3 holes pretty easily, and then just went for a midpoint between the 3 holes, and kept on drilling. If you're ever thinking of drilling through some really, really hardened metal, and you're like me, you have no idea what you're doing, just through trial and error, learn from me. I actually knew a little bit from an old metal shop class that cutting fluid, as it's known, lubricant, will help. And hey, look at that, all 5 holes done. Exactly where I wanted them. Thank God I I did not want to have to start this over. So at this point, I marked using spray paint, marked basic holes. I didn't need them perfectly aligned of where the 5 lines of holes in the blades for the Shikoro were going to have to be. So because of this, I made a stencil. It's going to be 6 holes in 5 spots per blade. This is what the cord, the rope, is going to go through. Also, on the first blade, of course, I managed to paint my hand, because I'm a genius. But I wanted all 6 of these holes to basically be more or less evenly spaced and identical, uniform, if you will. I would have used the pen to mark it, except it really wouldn't have shown up on the duct tape. And then, with those hole markings in place, I could now extend the lines of where I wanted the 5 lines of cord to come down. Groovy. Went in and got a nitrile glove because I got tired of washing my hand off with gasoline. Just for the record, gasoline, if you use it quickly, it'll very, very easily take spray paint off of your skin. But now it was time, once the paint had dried, it was time to do some drilling. Again. I am cutting out so much drilling from this video because this was a good, solid, another half hour of drilling 80 holes. Am I doing that math right? Yeah, 80 holes. Because the last vein only had 4 holes at a time instead of 6. But it was 6 holes times 5 for the first 2 veins, and 4 holes times 5 for the final blade. Did more drilling that day than a porn star in a gangbang. I also did this indoors, not because it was easier to clean up, it wasn't, but it was raining, and I didn't want to go outside with an electric drill. But hey, look at that. I managed to get the veins. Now it was time to paint them up before I tied them. And I decided I was going to go for, again, with the striping effect, but I wanted it a little more chaotic this time. There is no rhyme or reason as to how I put this masking tape on. As you can see, I'm doing the same thing I did with the Hachi, like not even coverage, just some of it's darker, some of it's flatter. I love doing masking. And once it dried, it was time to do a bare mock-up so that I could trim the excess off the blades finally. At this point, I'd realized also that yes, the Shikoro blades needed to go on the outside of the helmet, including the brim. So I'm just using twine here to just hold it in place because, like I said, I'm just mocking this up. Also found out at this point, trial and error, easier to do this with the helmet upside down. A lot easier. Instead of on the styrofoam head. And that was just a quick and easy little mock-up. But this gave me an idea of how much excess I could trim off the sides. Plus, it made me feel good to realize that, wow, this was really coming together. So, just using my handy-dandy marker here again to mark the excess. Didn't want to trim all the way back. Didn't want it like flush with the holes. But I was happy that I'd left some excess because then when I cut it, it would overlap in a much more uniform manner. And doing the other side. I also tried it on because, you know, just to see how it was coming along. And yeah, that was a good feeling. So once again, using the tin snips to cut through the steel. This time rounding it out a little more. Also having already painted and duct taped the blades, there was really no polishing I needed to do on the edges that I cut this time because they weren't sharp. They were already kind of blunted by the paint and the duct tape. Now it's time to do, I don't know how to say the Japanese name correctly, so I'm just going to call this the ear flaps. They're one of the, again, they're one of the really traditional parts of a samurai helmet that makes people think, oh, that's a samurai helmet, that's a Kabuto. And I'm using some more of that cheap throwaway steel. I decided I did want to go traditional with this and make them threaded into the Shikoro blades. So I needed to create the earpieces as these little L-shaped chunks, and the little narrow part is where I was going to drill 4 holes that would tie in with the Shikoro blades. Just make my little earpieces. Yay! Now, in this case, I was a little smart, and before I duct taped it, I just used the pen. That way I didn't have to use the paint on the stencil. But I'm using the same stencil just to make sure that the holes line up. And they do. Neat. Then, of course, I duct taped it. And since the part that has the holes drilled in it wasn't going to be visible once the helmet was assembled, I just left that part bare. Okay, time to play with paracord. And this is going to tie it all together. First thing I found is that the holes that I drilled in the helmet were too damn narrow, so I had to go back and widen them by about 1/8 of an inch for what I was doing, because the one hole on the brim of the Hachi would have a double strand through it. And so I just tied a fat little knot. And I had just basically measured out by, I don't know where I got the number, I basically measured out a length of the paracord that was roughly 62 inches long and folded in half, because I figured that would be enough to braid all 3 blades together without coming up short. And so here we have it. First time I'm going to attach one of the blades. Now, I had looked up online the patterns of how Shikoro blades were sewn together. There's a lot of different ways. Samurai helmets over the centuries, they really evolved a lot. And I don't know if there's even a name specifically for the knot that I'm using here for the tie pattern that I'm doing here. Basically make an X and then thread the 2 back through, and then on the next blade you make an X. And of course, this is where I fucked up and realized I forgot to attach the earpieces, so I had to go back and re-knot this one. Left the earpieces straight for now. I was going to bend them once the Shikoro was in place, the neck guard was in place. There's Twiz. Hello, Twiz. Editing this down a lot because it was another solid hour of tying and tightening and tying and tightening over and over and over again. God, I need to get back in the gym. And then on the final blade, oh wait, this is still just the second blade. Tying and tying, but it looked like my my estimated length of cord was, yeah, definitely enough. And tying, and tying. If you've ever owned boots that have more than 12 eyelets, then you understand my pain right here. This is like lacing up the world's longest boots for the first time. But once I got it through on the final blade, I was able to pull them pretty tight. And on this one, it's only 4 holes 5 times because it's going to end on the inside and you're going to knot it and tie it really, really tight. And for now, it's just doing a square knot, but paracord does not like to stay in a square knot, so when I did the final tightening, I decided I was going to use a clove hitch. Yeah, doing the square knot here, tightening it up. Right on. Also, a couple of people who actually knew what I was doing, we've been joking about how I kind of felt like Tony Stark building his Iron Man suit. So I actually didn't mean to wear the Stark Racing Industry shirt when I took this video, but I think it's kind of funny. Also, before anybody asks, the bracelet that you see on my wrist is a Leatherman Tread. It was an anniversary gift from my wife several years back, and I haven't taken it off since I received it. It is expensive, but it is one of the most awesome multi-tools I've ever owned in my life. It looks really cool, and it's extremely functional. Like, I cannot count at all how many times I've used it over the last few years. When just on the spot, I'm like, oh, hey, I need a flathead screwdriver. Oh, I need a hex wrench. Oh, I need a SIM card remover. It actually has that. But I've used it to change car batteries and fix a knife that had some broken bolts, stuff like that. Almost done with the tying. Almost. At this point, I felt pretty good about this project. Now that I've tightened it and tied it and tightened it and tied it, finally it's time to put in that final clove hitch and cut off the excess paracord, which, yeah, it was easy to eyeball. Cut it with, like, 3/4 of an inch. One of the things I was really worried about was that I was doing this just completely off the cuff, and I was kind of worried, like, would the Shikoro touch my neck? Oh, here it was time to bend the ear flaps finally, give it more of that samurai look. Although I left these flat for now because I have to decorate them before I bend them into a curl so that they look more samurai. But this gives you a basic idea. Interestingly, these ear flaps are actually part of the helmet to keep somebody from slicing a sword down on the cords on the side of your Shikoro and cutting them off. Not that I think that would ever be an issue in my life. All right, there we have it. And I was, like I said, I was a little worried that it was going to touch my neck when I bent or moved my head or what have you, but I tried it on, and it turns out this came out perfectly. It absolutely came out just the right size. So now all I have left to do is decorate it some more. But this was part 1, and there will be a part 2. And I hope you enjoyed this video.